Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Greetings, everyone. You're listening to Zoya Khan from Expert Trainers Academy. If you're new here, let me introduce you about us. Expert Trainers Academy is world-renowned provider of safety training and ISO certifications, and its services are available all around the globe. We are authorized to offer courses for organizations such as OTH United Kingdom, the European Safety Council, AOSH United Kingdom, Bharat Sevak Samaj, and India's Education Board of Vocational Training. We, Expert Trainers Academy, are committed in delivering the highest standard of health, safety, quality, and environmental training to develop a safer working environment.
So before we step into this confined space training, I would like to touch base with some basic terminologies. Some might be some like Mr. Pervez is just been new to this. Although he's working the safety field, so there might be some freshers also might have been in. So I just wanted to share light on the different terminology that we use in health and safety. Health. What is health? Absence of disease. In simple terms, absence of disease or absence of illness, we can call it health. What is safety? Absence of hazard. Any place there is no hazard, you can call that as safety. So absence of risk or absence of hazard, we can call that as safety. Next, what is hazard? Hazard, khatra. So something or anything which has the potential to cause harm. Something or anything which has the potential to cause harm. That is called hazard. Let's take an example. There is a water spillage on the floor. So what is hazard? Slip hazard. So next, hazard. Risk. What is risk? It's the combination of likelihood of the hazard that is present and what is the outcome that we'll get from the hazard. So nothing but it's a combination of likelihood and severity of the hazard from the hazardous event. So risk is equal to likelihood into severity. Next, accident, an unwanted, unplanned, undesired event that resulted in personal injury or even fatality or property damage. That is called accident. Let me say that again. An unwanted, unplanned, which are event which resulted in personal injury or death or fatality or property damage. We can call it as accident. Next, near miss. Near miss, an unplanned event that did not resulted in any form of loss, but it has the potential to cause. Today, near miss can be tomorrow's accident. So we must investigate even the near miss too. Just because it's a near miss doesn't mean that it will not lead to accident. So it might lead to an accident tomorrow. So near miss, what is near miss? An unplanned, unwanted event that did not resulted in any form of loss, but it has the potential to cause. So that is called near miss. So these are some basic terminology that we need to know. And coming back to confined space, confined, limited space. So limitation, what do you understand from this term limitation? Or something that which it cannot go beyond that. Let's take an example. 1 liter water bottle, can we fill more than 1 liter into it? No. So that has some limitations. If you keep pouring it, it will overflow. So confined, it's a limited, a space which has limited access and egress, limited ventilation, or a person cannot occupy continually and do some work. You can call that space as confined space. That is called a confined space. That's a definition or the meaning of the term confined space. Confined means limited. So what we will get out of this topic, confined space, today? In this course, we will identify confined space in general industry and also construction industry, and the difference between a confined space and a permission required confined space, determine if a hazard exists within the confined space, discussing about responsibilities of different people working in the confined space, like entrant, attendant, and entry supervisor, and identify the rescue options available in case of an emergency when working with the confined space. So definition of confined space, as we discussed in the general industry, is large enough and so configured that an employee can physically enter and perform the assigned work given by the employer. So it must be large enough for a person to physically enter and do some work which has been assigned by the employer. Or confined space in general, it's a space which has limited space, which has limited access and egress. Egress means exit. Access means going in, coming out. Access and egress, and limited ventilation. You might not have a sufficient oxygen level in that area, and you cannot work for a long period of time. So it has a limited space, limited or restricted means for entry or exit, and it's not designed for continuous employee occupancy. These are the examples of confined spaces: storage tanks, manholes, potholes, sewers, grain storage bins, boilers, ducts, tanks, vessels, silo, sewer, utility walls, pipelines, equipment and machinery, tunnels, and open top spaces, anything about 4 feet. Anything above 4 feet. And even excavation, the confined space, excavation confined space, which is about 1.2 meters and above. Any excavation which is of depth of 1.2 meters and above, we can call that as confined space. So these are some examples of confined space. So what are the hazards in confined space? Oxygen deficiency, or it may be the too much level of oxygen enriched atmosphere. A flammable atmosphere might be present. Toxic gas might be present. Noise, entrapment, engulfment, drowning. Temperature may be too high or too cold. Mechanical moving parts of machinery. Electrical hazard. Slip and trip hazard. So what are the control measures that we can do while working in? Some of the common control measures that we can do in confined space. Locking out moving parts. Lockout tagout system. You might have heard LOTO. LOTO. Lockout tagout. De-energizing electrical parts or wiring. Blocking the steam pipes and product feeding. Draining or pumping out liquid contents, and then air monitoring the content of oxygen present inside the confined space. So these are the control measures, some of the control measures that we can do in the confined space. Moving on to the next slide. Confined space standard 1910.146 as per Osha contained requirement for practices and procedures to protect the employees in general industry from the hazards of entry into permit required confined spaces. It is not applicable for agriculture, construction, or shipyard employment. Permit required confined space. What is permit? Permit to work. It's nothing a permit to work. Allowing to carry out certain work. Allowing to carry out or taking, like driving license. You are permitted to drive the vehicle. So permit to work. You are allowed to carry that work by taking necessary authorization from the permit issuer or other people who are actually, it will be done by the employer. So permit required confined space. Permit space means a confined space that has one or more of the following characteristics, like hazardous atmosphere might be present, engulfment hazard, internal configuration, inwardly converging walls or sloping floors might be recognized as serious safety or health hazard. So for those kind of spaces, you need to have a permit to enter inside the confined space to carry out certain work, which has been assigned by the employer. So permit space entry. If workplace contains permit spaces, employer shall inform exposed employees by posting signage like warning signage, danger signage, or other equally effective means. It's the employer responsibility to post sign if it's a permit required confined space. Permit space non-entry. If an employer decides the employees will not enter permit spaces, the employer shall take effective measures to prevent employees from entering permit spaces. So, if an employer decides its employees will not enter permit spaces, the employer will take all the necessary measures to prevent the employees from entering into that confined space. Written permit space program. It's like basically a permit to work document, the issue, receipt, clearance, cancellation, sometimes might be an extension. These are the four elements of permit to work document, or permit to work procedure, or permit to work system. Issue, receipt, clearance, and then cancellation. Prior to issue, the permit issuer must physically visit that area to identify the hazards, to ensure the proper precautions has to be taken, and they will list out all the description of the job, what are the isolation that is required, and then they will give it to the supervisor or requested for that work to be carried out. And then the supervisor receives it, or the permit receipt, the person who requested for the job, he receives it, and then he keep a copy, and then he provides training for the people how to carry out the work safely, and then the people go and carry out the work. And once the work has been completed, they come back to the supervisor and tell the work is finished, and then he goes and check and do the clearance, and then the permit issuer comes and check and he does the cancellation. So this is a written permit space program. This permit to work document vary from employer to employer. It's basically needs of a safety legal document which helps to prevent the accident in the first place, or mitigate the accident, or reduce the consequences level of the accident. So that is the basic purpose of doing permit to work. Permit to work is basically given for high risk activities generally. Written permit space program provides measures and procedures. It helps to prevent unauthorized entry. That means it's only the people who are allowed to carry the work, they are only allowed, authorized to carry out the work. Identify permit space hazards, ensure implementation of safe entry, safe means of access, maintain and ensure proper use of equipment, evaluate the permit space condition, provide for at least one attendant, monitoring multiple spaces. Methods of designating the roles of each active person. So these are the generally confined space attendant, confined space entry supervisor, and confined space entrance. So confined space entrance are the people or the workers who's going to enter into the confined space and going to carry the work. And we are going to see the responsibilities of each and every person. For summoning means calling rescue and other emergency service, emergency operation. We must notify all those people and keep it ready in the vicinity, so that whenever there is an emergency, they will be immediately called upon and they would be carrying out the rescue operation. And system for preparation, issue, use, and cancellation of entry permit. System for concluding entry after entry completion. Coordination with multiple employees if there is multiple employer present in that job site. System to review entry, operation, and permit space program. Moving on to the next slide. Confined space entry hierarchy. No permit space. Entry permitted only if all hazards are eliminated. Alternate entry procedures only in controlled atmospheric hazardous spaces. So written permit system, it's required for any high hazard or risk area. So the permit to work document is necessary for high risk activities inside the confined space. Alternative entry requirements. So the employees who's going to be, or the entrants who's going to be working inside the confined space, they must be trained. Atmospheric monitoring must be done. There must be a continuous ventilation so that the people working inside get enough oxygen. If a hazardous atmosphere is detected or ventilation stops, the space must be promptly exited. That means the work must be stopped. The people working inside, they must be exited from the confined space. Permit system. Written procedure for preparing and issuing permits for entry and returning permit space to service. What are the requirements? Document completion of required measures, like the permit issuer, he must physically examine the work site and then check all the hazards, identify all the hazards and risks, and proper control measures has been taken. PPE required, isolation requirements, everything done. Once everything is okay, then he signs and give it to the recipient. Permit availability, supervisor signature, activity, how long the duration. Generally, one permit is valid for 8 hours, one shift. And then permit termination or cancellation. Entry permit shall identify the space, which location, the confined space to be entered, what is the purpose of entry, what is the date, what is the duration of the task, who are all the authorized entrant to enter inside the confined space, like attendant, supervisor, Hazard, what are the hazards within the space, the isolation requirements, and acceptable entry condition. Just now we discussed the permit issuer must do all these checks prior to work to carried out inside the confined space by the confined space entrant. Entry permit additional requirements, air monitoring, what are the PP required, method used to control the hazard, communication procedures like establishing a communication from inside a confined space to the outside of a confined space, and name and telephone of the rescue service and rescue and emergency services. That must be the vicinity. We need to alert them and make sure they are in the vicinity area. So air monitoring and ventilation inside a confined space to ensure there is enough oxygen. So we are going to see the roles and responsibilities of different people. One is authorized entrant, and then attendant, and then confined space entry supervisor. Who is the authorized entrant? The employee or employees who is going to enter into the permit required confined space and going to carry out the work. And then confined space attendant, the individual or the worker who is stationed outside of the confined space, who monitor the people who's working inside the confined space. The people who's working inside the confined space are called confined space authorized entrant. And then confined space entry supervisor, who's a person who's responsible for planning, authorizing, and terminating the confined space entry. So these are three types of people involved for the confined space activity. Authorized entrant, what he must know, what are his responsibilities? Knowledge of hazards present in the confined space. He must know how to use the equipment properly, the communication methods. He must know when to alert the attendant who's standing outside and when to exit. Attendance, the knowledge of hazard in permit space, aware of behavioral effects of exposure, maintain an accurate count of entrants. He must know how many people have gone inside and working inside the confined space. He must remain outside. He's like a savior. He's like a guard who's watching the people who's inside. Remains outside permit space during operations. He must communicate with the entrants every now and then. He must monitor activities inside and outside of the confined space. He must summon or call the rescue and emergency services whenever there is a need for emergency to be called. And then attendant, he must take action when unauthorized person approach permit space. Perform non-entry rescues. I mean, he must not enter into the rescue. He must not enter inside the confined space and carry out rescue. He must stand outside all the time. He must perform no other duties that might interfere with primary duty to monitor and protect. Like I said, he's a savior or he's a guard who is watching from outside to the people who is working inside the confined space. The confined space entry supervisor, what are his roles and responsibilities? He must know the knowledge of hazards in permit space. He must verify the completion of all test, isolation, procedures, and equipment displays as specified by the permit to work document. He must terminate and cancel permit as required. He must verify rescue services and operable someone's capability. So they must be, whenever they call, they must be able to reach within the time limitation. He must remove unauthorized individual in that area of the confined space. He must ensure entry operations remain intact. Moving on to the next slide. Training. The training must be provided to all employees acquired, like attendant, entry supervisor, and also entrant. So training must be provided to all this category of people. So all employees acquire they get the understanding, like I said, the training is also another way to get themselves competent. They must get the acquired knowledge, training, ability, and skill to perform the work inside a confined space safely. So when we need to provide training, before they are deployed inside the confined space to carry out work, before change in assigned duties, or whenever there is a change in operation, and employee proficiency must be tested and the trainer or the institution which provides the training or the organization which provides the training, they must issue a certificate of training for the people who participated in the confined space training. And then the last session, the rescue and emergency services. There is a two type of rescue. One is entry rescue, and the one is non-entry rescue. What is the entry rescue? Entry rescue is nothing but people will enter inside the confined space and then do the rescue. Use rescue and emergency services because they are trained and very professional in carrying out rescue services entering into the confined space. Use own employees if possible, but they must be trained and must be competent. Non-entry rescue, like standing outside and doing the rescue using retrieval systems or methods like using of tripod equipments. Using rescue and emergency services. Evaluate prospective services ability to perform the summons in a timely and professional manner. Like the rescue and emergency services, they must be proficient or they must be professional in carrying out this rescue operation. They must also identify the hazard inside the confined space. So prior entry, you must call upon them and check about the confined space. So they are also aware about the hazards and they also practice mock rescue. Rescue and emergency services. Rescue using in-house employees. In-house means the people who are already working inside the organization. So they must be trained to perform assigned rescue duties. They must be trained in basic first aid and CPR. And they must be practicing rescue at least every year. If using air supplying respirators like SCABA, SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, additional training is required as per 1910.134. As per Osha requirement, they must be provided additional training how to use the SCABA, etc. Non-entry rescue, like the people who are standing outside and carrying out the rescue operation. Retrieving an entrant from a confined space without going into the space. Entrants must wear a chest or a full body harness with retrieval line attached. So it will be useful for them to lift them up using tripod. Confined spaces in construction. Employees required to enter confined or enclosed spaces shall be instructed on hazards. So the employees, they must be informed about the hazard, risk, and what are the control measures that need to take. Employer also must comply with any specific regulation like confined space regulation 1997. Whatever they're saying, or the OSHA standards, whatever they're saying, they must follow that. Who? The employer. So what is the reason for issuing permit to work and all these things is basically to keep the employees safe or to prevent the accident happening in the first place or to mitigate the accident or to mitigate the consequence level of the accident. So these are the basic purpose of, confined space. As soon as we say it's a confined space, there are foreseeable risks like oxygen deficiency, engulfment, drowning, etc. So there will be an hazard. There will be a risk inside the confined space. So we are taking all the protective measures proactively so that accidents can be avoided or mitigated. So we are seeing some examples of confined space again, and this is a question: is this a confined space? Yes. 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 Open air space, anything above 4 feet is again a confined space. Excavation, again a confined space. It's depth of 1.2 meter and above. So again a confined space. Is this a confined space? No. Is this a confined space? Yes. 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 Okay, we are going to summarize this. So we are get to know from this what is confined space. It's a limited access and egress, limited ventilation, and it is not a space for continuous occupancy of carrying out the work. And a difference between confined space and a permit required confined space. A permit required confined space has one or more hazardous like engulfment, drowning, hazardous atmosphere might be present. So it's a permit required, basically authorization required from a competent person to carry out work inside a confined space with all the necessary protections are taken. And method to use determine whether hazard exists within the confined space. And we have seen the responsibilities for confined space entrant, the person who's going to enter inside the confined space and carrying out the work. And then confined space attendant, a person who's standing outside and monitoring the activities outside and also inside the confined space of the entrant. And also confined space entry supervisor and rescue operation. There are two types of rescue. One is entering inside a confined space and doing rescue. Other one who's standing outside, non-entry rescue, standing outside and carrying out rescue using tripod or other methods of rescuing a person who's trapped inside a confined space and needing some safety.